This channel is supported by TrueFire. TrueFire is an online library of lessons from some of my favourite players. There's thousands of lessons on there. You can use the promo code JNC40 to get 40% off of any of their courses. So when I bought a Les Paul this year, I kind of did it in a maybe stupid, definitely naive way, and I kind of just bought it based on playing a 2002 Les Paul that I found for David Beebe, and then I was like, well, that worked for me, I'll buy another one. As time goes on, I saw an article today talking about, the changes that have happened with the Gibson Les Paul and all of the things, some really key things that are a little bit confusing. It's also not totally clear which guitars have what. The key issues that I think people kind of hone in on, and one that definitely you would notice would be the neck shape. So you've got either a 60s neck or a 50s neck. Those are the two broad categories, but there's probably loads of variation within that. So the 50s is like the chunkier neck, feels quite comfortable to me. The 60s is slightly slimmer, a bit of a faster feeling neck. You have then issues of weight relief, and it's not totally clear. There's a bunch of guitars now which are not weight relieved. If you buy used, there's a bunch which are, and there's some even that were chambered. And the history of this stuff is kind of a little bit messy. There are some really good guides for this online, some forums as well. And then the other thing, the even more mystical thing, is the neck tenon. And this one is one that is fairly hotly debated. And the idea with this neck tenon thing is that the way they join the neck to the body, it's glued on. Some joins go underneath this neck pickup, some kind of just stop at the fingerboard, and there's a debate whether this causes more sustain, a more stable joint, all this sort of stuff. I have to say, I think the short version of it is probably these things you have to get a little bit forensic and dig down a huge rabbit hole if you want to get into this, would it be better or not to just buy a guitar based on whether you like the sound of it and the look of it, which is what I ended up doing. I don't know if that's a stupid thing to do. I could have probably spent, I don't know, months and months researching some of this stuff, and I don't know, would it end up with you buying a better guitar in the end or not? I don't know. Let's just look at some of these differences a little bit more closely. Shouldn't be this difficult to choose a Gibson Les Paul, I think. It should be one of those things where they just clearly state, you know, what are these things, what's the difference. I think that would make it a little bit easier, especially when there's been like these troubled years of Gibson kind of doing things which people didn't necessarily like. These had an initial run and then were discontinued and brought back, and I think after that there was this Norlin era thing where the company was bought by a different company essentially, and then they started to really make quite drastic adjustments to the design of the guitar. Some of them potentially negative, some of them potentially could have been positive. So for instance, they added a volute to the neck, which would have presumably resulted in a few less headstock breaks. The other sorts of things they started doing though were kind of weight relief and sandwiching the bodies and stuff like that. Now, the things that I think people most care about when it comes to a Les Paul design, one would be, is it weight relieved or chambered? These kind of questions. And the other thing that I read people saying a lot is it long tenon or short tenon, or what's the tenon? So these two things, I think you can find some answers for this stuff online, but it seems to me that you've got a massive rabbit hole of reading to do, and no real way to know for sure whether things are going to be what you expect until you take out the neck pickup. Now, so the tenon is to do with how much of the fingerboard or stuff underneath the fingerboard kind of extends beyond the actual neck itself. And the idea being, I think, that a longer tenon either has more sustain or is a more stable connection or whatever, because this part of the neck is actually glued into the body. I think the traditional for a little bit and some of the custom shop ones do indeed have the long tenon, but it seems that most of the modern kind of Les Pauls do not. I need to check up on this, but maybe the 50s standard, maybe. And I think even Joe Bonamassa's Epiphone, he kind of insisted that it had the long tenon. But even the tenon seems to be different depending on which era. To me, personally, as a non-expert on this stuff, I'd be surprised if people could really tell the difference. The only real way that you would know is if you took this off and had a look, right? I don't know for sure that there's a stability issue if you do have a short tenon neck. Let me know in the comments if you do know if that is the case. Now, the other thing that it is a little bit easier to find information on is the weight relief stuff. So past about 1981, almost all Les Pauls have had some weight relief, and it started off being this Swiss cheese kind of thing is what they call it, where you have like 9 holes drilled out of the body underneath the maple. The reason for this presumably was because they started using cheaper wood, and instead of having really heavy guitars, they decided it would be better to have slightly lighter guitars. Now, the weight, interestingly, does seem to be quite an important factor with Les Pauls, because if you look at this photo from the Gibson custom shop wall, they actually grade the lighter backs as being more desirable. So the R9, I think, is their top of the range, was supposed to be below £8, or £8 or below, and then I think the R8 was supposed to be £9 or below, and they kind of grade the back in that kind of way. And so that is one of the key aspects to a Les Paul. I think lighter is considered better, and for that reason it makes sense that they would weight relieve these if they were using less mature mahogany and that sort of stuff. I think if you want non-weight relieved, you can now get the 50s standard. So there was like a period between about 2006 and 2015, I think it's something like that, where Gibson did some really strange things and did kind of chambering bodies. I think if you go from 2005 below and post Norlin, then there's examples of, you know, pretty much just normal guitars. And then 2006 to about 2015, you know, you get things like the weird tuners. You get things like fully chambered bodies, which probably are quite light. and you know, different kind of chambering and all this sort of stuff. And then around 2018, I think they went bankrupt, which I couldn't even remember that Gibson were in that much trouble. But I think what they're doing now is try to kind of at least market the idea of kind of getting back closer to the original stuff. So the 50 standard, I believe, has a non-weight relief body, and if you look at a site like Peach, for example, you can select, and you know, they weigh each example. I think that's a really good idea if you're kind of buying a Les Paul without being able to play it. I think the most accurate ones would be like the Murphy Lab things, but they're incredibly expensive, but they're also then going to be, I think, tending to be on the lighter side, and potentially a little bit more historically accurate. Although if you look on the forums, it does seem like even the true historic stuff is not necessarily as accurate as it could be, and you know, a lot of people are somewhat skeptical, saying probably it's marketing. Do you care about this stuff? Maybe even an Epiphone with long tenon is just as accurate as a standard kind of from 2002, which this is. I don't know, this probably isn't a very vintage accurate guitar at all. Yeah, it just seems there's a whole bunch of stuff. You could get really deep into the list on this. Let me know what you reckon. Do these things matter or not? Or do you just play 2, 3, 4, 5 Les Pauls until you find one that kind of speaks to you? Or do you buy one of the newer ones and just say, well, whatever, I think Gibson might even be doing better guitars now than they have for quite a while based on what people are saying. But even so, you're still going to have QC issues here and there. So it's a big question mark in it. But if you found modern Gibsons do a good job for you, let me know in the comments as well. As I say, this is 2002, and I think that sits right in the era which is sort of fine, right? It's before they went fully bonkers, and after they went a little bit bonkers as well, right? This seems to be sort of in that period where they were just making guitars, right? 2002. Anyway, I'll catch you in another video soon. Let's go film some playing with this thing.